I always felt music in my heart and soul, and I tried different instruments throughout my life, but it wasn't until I got to try a harp where it really clicked for me. Music has always been a part of my life. When I was a young child, when I was 6, I began to play the family piano spontaneously by ear. And one evening I went into the living room, the old upright antique piano that had been in our family for generations, and I spontaneously started playing it, and all of a sudden this music started coming out of me. I was just all up and down the white keys of the piano, and it was just spontaneously coming out, and I was creating beautiful melodies and playing with both hands. And it got to the point where my mother would come home from work, and she would sit down in the chair in the living room and listen to me play. And then she started inviting friends to come over, and I started doing these little recitals for people. But then, unfortunately, she invited a friend who was an accomplished pianist to come over and watch me play. And he saw that I really didn't have any proper technique. And he said something to the effect like, "Oh, no, you're going to have to learn how to play properly." And when he said that to me, he said it to me like I'm doing it wrong. And as a 6-year-old, it kind of turned off. It wasn't until some almost 30 years later here in Sedona when I started playing the harp. And the first music that came out of the harp was very reminiscent of these early childhood songs I was playing. Well, how it happened to me was that I came to Sedona in the late 1980s, around 1988. And I came to Sedona to live as an artist because I've always been an artist as well. And I've been a glass artist since I was a teenager, working with stained glass. I had been living up in Colorado for about 10 years. And I started hearing rumors of this mystical place in the desert Southwest that had these magnificent red rock formations and powerful energy vortexes. And I was kind of just very curious about this because all of a sudden people were talking about this place. And this was before the internet. And so you couldn't just Google it back then and find out what it was. But people, the rumors were spreading. And that's when I started to hear about it. So all of a sudden I was really getting a strong hit that I had to go to Sedona. And as fate would have it, I met a man where I was living in Colorado. I was living in Aspen, by the way. And I met a man there who owned a small cottage down on the creek here in Sedona. And he said, "Why don't you go to my place? And it's empty, and go check out Sedona." And coming down Oak Creek Canyon for the first time, I was absolutely just blown away by what I was seeing. And in that moment, I heard this voice in my head, or this feeling, and it said home. And I was like, wow, because I was searching at the time for something new. And immediately I knew that this was the place. So I ended up coming back and setting up shop here and living as an artist, and set up my glass studio and started creating stained glass windows. But after a short time, I got a message, and I was feeling intuitively that there was something that wanted to come through. Something new was coming to me. I was here to birth something new. So that's what I did. I let go of my possessions, and I found a pop-top camper van, which I moved into, and I ended up living in my car for 3 years here, and sleeping every night out in the Red Rocks. And back in those days, the forest was open here, so you could park anywhere back then and camp out for the night. And so I would just often just hike by myself and go way out by myself. And what I discovered there was a magnificent silence that is in the canyons, in these ancient canyons, a stillness, a tranquility, So my inner voice was telling me that I was to just sit in silence. And so that's what I did. And I just would sit and I would meditate. And at the time I was doing a lot of work, coming to Sedona, everybody was activating their DNA codes and their light body and working with crystals and energy vortexes and all this. So I fully immersed myself in the culture here of that. And, everywhere I went, I had my pockets full of crystals to amplify my energy and to use as channeling, to help me to receive messages from the cosmos. And I went through many kind of mystical experiences there. But ultimately what happened to me was that within the silence, when I got real quiet and just really became very, very, very still, it allowed my senses to expand. It allowed my chakras, my energy body to expand. That's one of the gifts of Sedona, that here we can really allow our energy field to expand. It's encouraged to really embody your true self and become a luminous being here. That's why it's so special here for me and many others. But it was listening in the silence where all of a sudden I went so deep. My mind became so still. And it was from that where I began to perceive there were some music, some subtle strains of some music that I was hearing when I was out in the forest and the canyons. And at first I thought somebody had a portable stereo and they were playing maybe some symphonic classical music in the distance that was being carried, floating in the wind, and I was picking up a little bit of it. But then I realized, no, that's not what this is. I'm hearing something of a divine origin. And at first it was faint, but the more that I tuned into it, the louder it became. And it was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. It was like the angelic choirs, the symphonic celestial music of the higher planes. And I had heard stories of many mystics and saints speaking about this inner music, maybe the music of the spheres, but the inner music of the angels. And all of a sudden, I was starting to tune into it. I was hearing it myself. And it was it was such a beautiful sound, and the frequency of it and the vibration was so high and so pure. And the quality of the sound that I was hearing was like nothing I had ever heard before. Ultimately, my inner guidance was to allow this sound to take you on a journey. So trust, surrender, and let go on this sound current. And so that's what I did. You could imagine me sitting out in the forest by myself, having this experience. And it was by doing this where I was able to exit my body. I was able to float right out the top of my head, and I was taken up into the light. So this was like the template that I was using. So that's what I did. The sound just took me right out of my body. I was able to travel up the central column of light and connect with my Christ self, my I am presence. And then the music was just surrounding me. And as I was looking around with my inner vision, I could see there was some subtle shapes around me, some forms. And as I adjusted my focus, all of a sudden it came into focus where I could perceive that I was surrounded by a group of angels. And there was a whole flock of them. And these were the cherubs. And they came into focus, and they look like little babies, but their faces are kind of older. They have like an old, timeless, eternal quality to them. Kind of came back into my body and just shook my head and tried to clear my mind, because I didn't know if I was imagining this, creating it in my own imagination. But then I closed my eyes and went back into the light, and there they were. And it got to the point where I could hear them. I could hear them in conversation amongst themselves. And they weren't moving their mouths. They were just telepathically communicating to each other. And they were saying like, wow, look at him. Do you think he could see us? Do you think he could hear us? And I was like, oh my God. And in my mind, I said, I can see you. I can hear you. Can you hear me? And they looked at me just like I'm looking at you. And they said, yes, we can hear you. We can see you. And I said, I can see you and hear you. And when we realized that we had this circuit of connection, this channel, they got so excited. They were like little puppy dogs flying around. They were like, it was a very exciting moment, because these angels had made contact with a mortal human on earth. And this doesn't happen like this all the time. It's a very unique experience. So this is how this relationship now started for me. And now it's been 30 years that I've been working with this group. They took me on many journeys and showed me a lot of different things that are up in this beautiful angelic celestial worlds. It's almost beyond description. I did the best I could to describe what I experienced in the book. What happened was they took me to a place where all of a sudden I was in space, in a dark space, just kind of floating with them. And I would fly with them. They taught me how to fly. And I was in my astral body, right? And these two angels came and picked me up kind of under the arm and just started flying with me. And the feeling was just amazing, just pure exhilaration. And as I kind of looked back with my inner vision in my light body, I could see that I didn't have feet. And there was like sparkles trailing off, like fairy dust trailing off of me as we were flying around. It was just totally magical. But I went to many places with them, and ultimately what happened was I was with them, and all of a sudden we were kind of in a dark space, and I was surrounded by them. And they told me to look over here. And when I looked up into the darkness, there was one little point of light, like a star, like a diamond on black velvet, one single point of light. And it was small. But then we started looking at it all together, and all of a sudden we started moving towards it, and this little point of light started getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And all of a sudden, it just turns into this big ball of light, of golden light, like a sun, a brilliant sun. I call it with the light of 1,000 suns. And it was very, very strong. Almost I couldn't even almost look at it. But then as I relaxed and I just let go, because these angels were always telling me, trust, surrender, and let go. Just let go and trust. And so as I did that, I just relaxed into it. And then all of a sudden, this energy and this light coming off of this luminous sphere of golden light was like pulsating pure love, pure divine love. And it was a feeling that I had never experienced. It was like pure ecstasy and bliss of a supreme nature. And as I was beholding this luminous sphere, that it was just cleansing my soul. It was washing me clean of all my lifetimes, of all the sadness and despair and loneliness and heartache of all my lifetimes. Was just cleansed away and lifted away and transmuted in that moment. And I was forever changed in that moment. You know, as I was just experiencing this luminous ball of light, I could see there was some sort of shapes or forms around it. Then once again, as I adjusted my inner vision and was seeing it, this celestial panorama, I was able to perceive that this luminous sphere was surrounded by the multitudes of angels of all different sizes, and they were all kind of spiraling around this luminous sphere of light, and they were all singing praises. The sound coming off it was like, oh, of multitudes of angels all singing in the most pure harmonies and the most incredible harmonic structure of sound. It was otherworldly and so beauty and infused with divine love and beauty like nothing I had ever experienced before. And, you know, the angels were with me, and they told me, you know, after this experience, they said, your mission is to be a channel for this heavenly sound that you're hearing, and that the instrument you are to play is the harp, and that this is your life's purpose, is to play the harp and to channel the heavenly music and bring it to earth at this time of the dawning of the golden age. Well, you know, the angels, they told me this, and at first I couldn't believe really what I was experiencing and what I was hearing and feeling. It was all so otherworldly, and at times I thought that maybe I was losing my mind. I was in my early 30s. I was 33 when this happened to me. Well, when I came to Sedona, I had a Native American flute that I still have now for almost 40 years, and I would walk out in the canyons by myself and play my flute as an offering to the ancestral spirits that live in these canyons, just as an offering. But then the angel said, you're to play the harp. And as I was saying that, I didn't know if I was losing my mind. I was making this all up in my imagination. And, I really didn't tell many people about what was happening. It was such a personal experience that was happening inside of me during this time. And thank God I had one friend that was close to me who used to let me use his shower because I was living in my car. And I told him what was happening. He was very encouraging. He was a very spiritual guy. He would tell me that this is real. You have to stay with it. And I did. And then the angel said, your mission is to play the harp. And if you choose to embark on this journey with us, we will make certain connections for you. We will work as a team to bring this heavenly music to earth. I finally said I would, and it was kind of dramatic. It was around the time of my birthday in the fall in October, and I was back in Boynton Canyon. I received this message, and I've been thinking about it, and I finally climbed up on a ridge, and I just said, okay, I offer myself in service to this mission, and I will be a humble servant, and I open myself up to be a channel to receive this music. And as soon as I said that, it was like something clicked. I met a woman spontaneously at the health food store who turned out was a harpist. And I told her that I was feeling drawn to the harp. And she said, well, I just happen to have a small little harp that's for sale. So why don't you come to my home and try it? And when she said that, I could hear my angels telling me, this is it, you got to go, So I said, okay, I'll come over. And when I went to her house and saw the harp and sat down with it, and I put my hands to the strings, it was like, I just felt that this was it. I just knew it intuitively, and I could hear the angels saying yes. So I ended up purchasing this little harp, and it had a small carrying case, and I took it into my van, and I would go out in the canyons and take this harp and hike the trails with it slung over my shoulder and go out in the middle of nowhere and take out my magic harp and just put my hands to the strings. And I would hear the angels telling me, trust, surrender, and let go. And so that's what I did. I would just let go and let my hands just come to the string. And I just started by this kind of thing, and then just doing little simple things. But all of a sudden, this energy started to come through my body, through my arms and my hands. It was strong, and it was kind of frightening at first because I never felt the force come. But the angels were just trust, surrender, and let go. And my hands just began to move on the strings by themselves. I could just completely let go of my hands. My fingers would just start moving by themselves on the strings. And it was really, really powerful and intense. And when this would happen, the energy was so hot that I would just break out in a sweat and my hands would be trembling and shaking, and my eyes would be tearing profusely. It was so strong, but my hands would just be moving on the strings by themselves. And that's how I learned to play. And if I would just relax, and then this angel would kind of come through me and move my hands on the strings. And that's how I was taught to play the harp. I was taught by an angel, taught me to play. It all started to come together and to align, and the vision got clear, and my trust and my faith in what was happening grew over time. But it all happened so very quickly to me. At the time I was living in my van and playing the harp every day. I was so captivated by the instrument that I would play for 3, 4, 5 hours a day. It was just, I knew this is what I was to do. And my skill level started to really develop quickly. And I would call friends and have them listen what's happening. And they were like, oh my God, wow, that's incredible, But after about 6 months, I got the message that I was to travel with my harp, that I was to take a trip. And I was to go to Australia. And an opportunity came. So I ended up going to Byron Bay in New South Wales, which is a magical kind of town like Sedona in Australia. And it was there, I had my little harp with me. And within a few days of being there, I went into a juice bar, and they had a bulletin board with some flyers on it. And there was a flyer that said recording studio for hire. and they had little cherubs playing harps on the flyer. And the angels were like, this is it. This is where you need to go, you know? So I called the number on the flyer and I made arrangements and went over to this guy's recording studio. And I spent a few afternoons with him, and he recorded these first little harp melodies that were coming through at about 6 months of playing without any formal lessons. And I played for him, and he recorded my harp. And then over the next few days, he was very skilled at adding instrumentation to the sounds that I was making. And he had, all sorts of keyboards and different instruments. So he started layering with, strings and flutes and different things. And after 3 days, I had a little cassette tape with several little demo songs. And I remember after leaving him that afternoon, when I finally got the cassette demo tape, and I went out to the beach late afternoon, and the sun was kind of low on the horizon, and the golden light was shimmering on this beautiful water in Byron Bay. And I put on my headphones, my little Walkman cassette thing, and I just sat there listening to this incredible sound we had just created as I was looking at the golden light shimmering on the water. And then all of a sudden, listening to this music, it just lifted me up. I went into the light, and I was taken up into this other dimension. And all of a sudden, I was looking at like a movie screen. And the angel said, this is future events of your life if you choose to continue the journey with us. And what I was shown was that I was to return to Sedona, get a bigger professional harp, and then make a real professional recording there. And then they showed me a finished CD in a catalog with other music. And they said, this is going to go all over the world and you're going to become very famous. I came what I was supposed to get, and I was guided to come back here to Sedona. So that's what I did. And I got a bigger harp and started playing it. And then the time was right. And okay, you're ready. And I hired a recording studio here. And I went in one evening, and we lit candles in the studio. And I said some prayers, called in the angels. And I sat at the harp, and it just came out of me. And I've been playing for about 10 months at this point, still with no formal lessons. But the music just flowed through. And then for about a month, I worked in this studio, and we added other sounds and layers, and I brought in other musicians to play with me. And after a month, it was done. And I called it Harp Magic. And I made my first little cassette tape. And I started giving it out to the bookstores here, the New Age bookstores around town. And so this is a wonderful example of how the angels work with me. That I told the angels, I said, this is really happening, but I don't know anything about the music industry. I don't know how to promote or market or do this. And so I just said, if you want this special music, your music to go out to the world, send me some help. And so I did a very intentional little prayer and ceremony when I asked for what I need and communicated to them. And then I just let it go. And then about a week later, the phone rang where I was staying at the time. And it turned out to be some record company executives that were here on a holiday. And they went into the bookstore, the old Eye of the Vortex bookstore, and my cassette music was playing on the in-house system. So as you're wandering through the books, there's this music playing, and it happened to be my music. As fate would have it, they were the owners of a record label, and they were looking for a harpist for their record label. All of a sudden, they heard this harp music when they were here in Sedona in the bookstore. And they inquired about it, and they asked the person for my contact, and they called me up. And they said, what's your story? And I told them the story. And they said, well, we're here to help you get your music out to the world. They wanted 5 records from me over the next 5 years with worldwide distribution. I couldn't believe it because I just asked, this is how the angels work. They're so brilliant. I asked for what I need, and within a week, I got the phone call. This never happens. It's like a Cinderella story kind of thing. And so I ended up signing this contract, and they took my first little cassette tape, and they pressed a nice CD, put a nice cover on it, And they started sending it out all over the world to their distribution channels. And all of a sudden, my music started going to South America, to Europe, to Canada, to Asia. And it was getting rave reviews. And it was just amazing. After about 3 months, I got a call from them. They said, "Peter, are you sitting down?" I said, "Yeah." And they said, "Well, your album has just been nominated for String Album of the Year in the Naird Indie Awards," which is back in the day, that was like the baby Grammys for all the independent record labels. And wow, it was incredible. And they flew me up to San Francisco for the awards ceremony on the red carpet. And I met some very influential people in the music industry who are still part of my community today. And I was brought right into kind of this mainstream music industry with record labels and producers. And it just took off for me like that. And I've never looked back.